big tech and regulations, we often hear Section 230 and FCC a lot. And for just like the general public, can you explain what the FCC is, what its reach is, and what it's there to do, but then also what Section 230 is, why people want to repeal and reform? Like, what are the parts of Section 230 we should actually be paying attention to?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with Section 230,
Great.
which, people again hear all the time thrown around. And it's actually, for as much attention as it gets, it's a tiny provision of law. It's, 26 words. You'll hear them often referred to as the 26 words that invented the internet, which is a bit of an overstatement. But it was part of a much bigger law, actually, that passed Congress in 1996. And most of that law was actually struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional speech regulation. But Section 230 remained. And what it did, what it was designed to do, was actually, the original title was called the Family Online Empowerment Act.
Oh.
It was designed for around really one purpose, and that was to get porn off the internet. That was what it was designed,
not a guess.
was designed to do. And essentially incentivized and protected the nascent technology companies to moderate, to take down porn without fear of lawsuit. So it created this immunity from lawsuit. It says, the companies are able to take down lewd, harassing, lascivious, et cetera, content, or content, otherwise objectionable, which has now been interpreted to include all kinds of things.
Yes.
But that in doing so, they would not be subject to lawsuit. So it was originally a very porous liability shield. It was a pretty narrowly constructed one that I would argue has been just stretched and distorted by the big tech companies with the aid of the courts to become this bulletproof immunity. Yeah. And they hide behind this protection to remove all kinds of content. And now people will say, oh, well, the First Amendment allows them to do that, right? They're private platforms. They're allowed to associate or disassociate with content that they agree or disagree with. And that's factually true. The difference is that Section 230 privileges that First Amendment behavior, right? Movie companies, newspapers, other First Amendment actors, they can disassociate with content they don't like as well, but they're subject to, lawsuit and claims and private rights of action that these tech companies are not subject to. So they are protected in a way that other First Amendment actors are not. Now you'll see other internet platforms benefit from Section 230 as well, right? You comment sections on the internet, right? If you say something ridiculous in the comment section of the New York Times, the New York Times cannot be sued for what you say. So it's useful in that regard, but for the tech companies, it's become this sort of bulletproof shield that's allowed them to act with impunity without consequence in many ways. Now, how that relates to the Federal Communications Commission, which is an independent agency sort of outside the scope of the executive, but they regulate a lot of our telecommunications and certain parts of how the internet works. And so under the Trump administration, the NTIA actually petitioned the FCC to help them to say, will you interpret Section 230, right? Yeah. Looking at this very bloated sort of statute that, many members of Congress and the president obviously felt had gone awry of its original intent, will the FCC come in and clarify what is allowed and what is not under the terms of the statute? Now, that's one way to get at the problem. The other way is to legislate. And so you're seeing a lot of reform and repeal proposals being put forward in Congress.
Okay. Before we get into what